I bought a house that unexpectedly ended up in my sister's name, leaving me in a state of shock. At 29, I'm repaying a mortgage for a house I originally purchased from my parents. They later transferred ownership to my sister as a gift, a fact they never shared with me. It's startling to see the lengths they went for my 27-year-old sister. I always felt my parents favored her, but the extent of it only became clear with this revelation. Growing up, I sensed a stark difference in how we were treated. While I was groomed for responsibility from a young age, my sister Tiffany was coddled and allowed the freedom to explore her interests without any academic pressure. My parents heavily invested in my education, pushing me to excel and build a solid career right after high school. Instead of letting me use my savings or take out a student loan, which they argued was too costly due to high interest rates, they chose to go into debt themselves. At the time, I thought they were shielding me from financial burdens. Once I graduated and landed a stable tech job, I felt the weight of their expectations to succeed as a return on their investment. They often reminded me of their sacrifices, which initially seemed like a way to keep me grounded. However, over time it became apparent that this was a form of emotional manipulation, leveraging guilt to influence my decisions. The pressure intensified when I started my career. Visits home were filled with relentless inquiries about my progress and reminders of the financial sacrifices they made for my education. Barely a year into my job, during a holiday dinner, my father made it clear they expected me to buy them a house as they could no longer afford to live on rent after spending their savings on my education. This demand, following so closely on the heels of their financial support for my studies, was overwhelming and made me deeply uneasy about my obligations towards them. This complex dynamic has left me grappling with feelings of betrayal and manipulation, while also wrestling with familial responsibilities and my sense of independence. I never imagined I'd be buying a house so early into my career, just 1 year into my first job, still sharing an apartment with 3 roommates. The idea of owning a home seemed way out of reach, despite my financial limitations and the reservations of banks. My parents insisted I buy a house. "Dad, I've barely started working, I can't even afford my own place," I protested. My father, with a determined look, responded, "We raised you to set goals and work towards them." My mother added in a calm but stern voice, "Without our help, you wouldn't have gone to college or become who you are today. It's time you repaid that debt." Although I felt overwhelmed, I couldn't find the courage to argue against their perspective. I knew I owed a lot to their sacrifices, but sometimes their expectations felt suffocating. I wanted to shout, "Who asked you to sacrifice so much?" But I held back, choosing instead to slowly withdraw from them. I began to only respond to emergency calls and stopped visiting home, using my busy job schedule as an excuse to keep my distance. Despite this, the idea of fulfilling their wish for a house never left my mind. After 6 years of diligent saving and working extra hours, I finally purchased a house for them. It was a cozy, modest home in a peaceful neighborhood, not luxurious, but comfortable. I thought fulfilling this obligation would at least bring some peace. I continued paying the mortgage for 5 years, making extra payments when possible to prevent foreclosure. Even though I had other dreams, like owning my personal space, traveling, and starting a family, the nagging from my parents ceased once the house was secured. They boasted to friends and relatives about their successful investment in my education, though I didn't engage much with them. The emotional distance remained. After months of intense work, I decided to visit them, hoping to bridge the gap. As I arrived, I noticed my sister Tiffany's car in the driveway. Excited at the prospect of a family reunion, I approached the house. Tiffany, now married and living elsewhere, hadn't been around much. Last I knew, my parents were still renting the old place. When I knocked, Tiffany, dressed in pajamas, greeted me, surprised. "What are you doing here?" I joked. As I entered, I asked about my parents lounging on the couch. She nonchalantly said, "Oh, they moved out." Confused, I pressed for more details. "Moved out? What do you mean?" "This is their house." Tiffany shrugged. "I guess they didn't tell you." "They gave me the house. I live here now." Her words made my heart sink, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. The realization that the house I had worked so hard to buy and maintain for my parents was now in my sister's name was both shocking and disheartening. It was a betrayal that reshaped my understanding of my family dynamics and my place within them. All this time, Tiffany mentioned it so nonchalantly as if it wasn't a big deal. Mom and Dad said I needed the house more than you, what with the baby on the way and all. It turned out that my parents had decided she should have the house. Shocked, I pressed for details on where our parents were now. Tiffany's casual reply was that they were renting an apartment across town. Overwhelmed with a mix of emotions, I left without another word and drove straight to their new place. When my mother opened the door, I couldn't hold back. "What is going on?" "Tiffany told me you gave her the house." "The house I've been paying for." "Explain yourselves." My mother, with an unsettling calmness, gestured for me to come inside. "Calm down, let's talk inside. I didn't think you'd care this much." Once inside, I barely crossed the threshold before I demanded answers. "Why would you give away the house I bought for you without even talking to me about it? Didn't you think I deserved to know?" My mother exhaled, her patience thinning. "We've been thinking about this for a while. You're successful, you don't need to worry. Do you want Tiffany's kids to grow up in an unstable home? With her own house, she won't have to stress over rent and can focus on raising her family." Her words ignited a fury in me. "I don't care where my niece or nephew grows up. We managed just fine in rental homes ourselves. It's not my job to secure Tiffany's financial stability. That's on her and her husband. If they need stability, they should work towards it, not depend on handouts." Hearing the heated exchange, my father joined in, his tone defensive. "Why are you making such a fuss? Tiffany needs stability. We couldn't give her the same opportunities we gave you. We didn't pay for her college, so she deserves the house." I was dumbfounded. "That's ridiculous. She didn't go to college because she dropped out of high school. Why should I pay the price for her choices?" They didn't seem to grasp the impact of their decisions. "You're already successful. You can just buy something else," they argued. "Sure, I could buy another house, but isn't that for me to decide, not you to dictate?" Their casual dismissal of my feelings and efforts left me reeling, as if the world had flipped upside down. Their reasoning baffled me, and with nothing left to say, I stormed out of their apartment in need of space and time to think. I checked into a hotel to collect my thoughts and cool down from the whirlwind of family drama. Since that shocking revelation last Friday, I've been struggling with how to proceed. It's now Sunday, and I'm supposed to fly back home on Tuesday. I was close to leaving right after discovering the truth, but after calming down, I realized there were more things I needed to sort out first. I'm particularly concerned about the mortgage balance, given that I had been making extra payments. I suspect it might be closer to being paid off than originally expected. Before visiting my parents, I texted my father to ask about the outstanding mortgage amount. He said he would check with a loan manager. In response, I insisted, "Take me to the bank tomorrow. I need to verify the outstanding balance myself. While I no longer want to continue paying the mortgage, I need a clear understanding of the situation. The thought of continuing payments for a house that's no longer legally mine seems unjust, especially considering how my parents and sister have seemingly taken my efforts for granted." I went to the bank and faced an even harsher reality. The extra payments I made were never credited towards the mortgage. Instead, my father had been using that money to cover their apartment rent. This discovery was devastating. I had been living frugally, saving aggressively to pay off the mortgage early, and now it appeared my sacrifices were for nothing. The bank manager showed me the monthly deposit records, confirming that I had indeed been paying approximately 2.1 times the required mortgage amount. When I pointed this out, my father initially seemed confused but eventually admitted that the records were accurate. "The records are correct. You were right," he said, seemingly overwhelmed. "We'll talk more later." This unexpected betrayal left me reeling. I sat quietly as the bank manager explained the remaining mortgage details and options for consolidating a loan. As soon as we were alone, my father pulled me aside and, to my astonishment, asked, "Why did you bring up the extra payments? Were those meant for the mortgage?" Raising my voice, I replied, "Yes, of course. Why else would I send extra money?" His next words left me stunned. "I thought it was for our expenses." This mix-up, or perhaps deliberate misunderstanding, compounded the betrayal and left me grappling with the depth of my family's deception and my financial entanglements. The situation demanded a serious reconsideration of my relationship with my family and how I would handle financial dealings with them in the future. As my father confessed to using the extra money I sent for the mortgage to pay their rent instead, I felt my world spin. Overwhelmed and betrayed, I sank into the nearest chair, my face buried in my hands. How could I even look at my parents now? My father tried to downplay the situation, sitting beside me and saying, "It's not that big of a deal." Not that big of a deal? You pressured me into buying a house, handed it over to Tiffany without telling me, and then used my money intended for the mortgage to cover your rent, and that's not a big deal, he responded offensively. Look, the house didn't benefit you, but remember, I spent all my savings on your college. A little payback isn't too much to ask. Besides, I made the mortgage payments on time. What's the problem with using the extra for rent? I'm not asking you for more money. His attempt to justify his actions only fueled my anger. The extra money was for early repayment of the mortgage, not for your living expenses. I left the bank, my mind racing with betrayal and disbelief. As I walked away, my father called after me, but I didn't turn back, heading straight for the subway station. Instead, my phone buzzed continuously with calls and texts from my mother, pleading, "Come home so we can discuss this." I didn't respond. The thought of sitting down and hashing it out became unbearable. I needed to take a stand against what I saw as sheer foolishness. Shocked and hurt by my father's manipulative justifications, I realized I had every right to be angry and to set firm boundaries. My generosity had been exploited, and choosing to ignore their calls and messages felt completely justified. It was time to prioritize my well-being. Trembling with anger, I returned to my home, determined to return to normalcy. As the new month rolled in, I broke from routine and did not send the mortgage payment. I had decided it was time for Tiffany to assume responsibility for the mortgage. If our parents intended for her to have the house, she and my parents needed to handle their financial decisions without dragging me into it. My father tried to reach out but found himself blocked. I had also blocked my mother, Tiffany, and her husband. In search of peace, I made the firm decision to stop paying the mortgage and to distance myself from their manipulations. When my parents realized the payments had ceased, they became furious. I received numerous calls and voicemails from unknown numbers, likely friends they were enlisted to try and contact me. Despite the barrage of attempts to reach me, I stood firm, no longer willing to let their decisions and manipulations control my life or my finances. It was time they understood the consequences of their actions and the importance of respecting my autonomy. Despite my parents' urgent cries that they couldn't afford the mortgage if I stopped paying, I silently laughed. This was no longer my problem. I blocked all the new numbers they tried to reach me with. But the saga didn't end there. 5 days later, I returned from work to find my father waiting at my doorstep, visibly furious. "This can't end like this. You owe us. We're the ones who sent you to college, who made you who you are today," he exclaimed. I countered, exasperated, "I've already paid more than enough. Do you even realize how much I've contributed to the mortgage? It's far more than what you spent on my college tuition. I owe you nothing." My father branded me as ungrateful, but I wouldn't let him guilt-trip me any further. "Stop it," I interrupted. "I'm done paying for your rent or any other expenses. That's your responsibility, not mine. I can't do this anymore. You raised me as an investment, looking to cash out for life. I am not just some asset you can exploit." With those final words, I left him at my doorstep, got into my car, and drove away. I avoided going back to my apartment immediately, fearful he might follow. I didn't need any more confrontations. When I eventually returned later that night, he was gone. In the days that followed, my phone was flooded with calls and messages. My mother left frantic voicemails, and Tiffany sent a lengthy message trying to explain why the house was crucial for her family. She called me selfish for not supporting them, but I felt a profound sense of liberation from their manipulative grasp. My relationship with them had effectively ended. The financial strains soon caught up with them. Tiffany struggled to make the mortgage payments, and my parents couldn't manage their apartment rent without my support. I had anticipated this outcome. It was just a matter of time until they would face the reality of their situation. About a year later, I heard that the house was put up for sale. My parents tried to salvage it using what little they had saved and their retirement funds, but their efforts fell short. Tensions escalated when my parents asked Tiffany and her husband to contribute to half of the mortgage costs, citing the financial burden. Tiffany, maintaining that the house was a gift, insisted they should bear the full cost. That's when my parents finally realized the gravity of their mistake. The situation unraveled, revealing the unsustainable nature of their expectations and the broken promises that led us to this point. The familial bonds had been strained past the point of repair, leaving everyone to reckon with the consequences of their actions and decisions. With the house finally put up for auction and subsequently sold, my father managed to recover a notable sum from the sale. This outcome, though bittersweet, was undoubtedly for the best. Reflecting on the financial contributions I made over the years, including the down payment and mortgage payments, I've come to terms with the reality that I won't be seeing that money again. They have no intention of reimbursing me, and accepting this has been a crucial step in moving forward. Now, there's no longer any facade of generosity or pretense of benefaction from their side. I've reconciled the fact that I have repaid in full the cost of my college education to my parents, even including the interest they might have incurred. This closure has freed me from any guilt associated with cutting ties with them. Family or not, the financial and emotional ledger is balanced. From what I've heard from relatives and my uncle, my parents have downsized significantly, moving into a smaller apartment to cut costs. They've begun to wisely manage the proceeds from the house auction, focusing earnestly on preparing for their retirement without the expectation of further financial support from me. This marks a significant shift in their approach to financial independence. Additionally, their relationship with my sister Tiffany has undergone a stark transformation. They have cut off any financial aid to her, demanding that she step up to take responsibility for her own family's needs. Despite Tiffany's attempts to leverage guilt as a means to sway them, my parents have stood their ground. This firm stance is a new and healthier dynamic for them, marking a pivotal change in our family's narrative. On a personal note, my journey has led me to secure my apartment, a space that represents my independence and a fresh start. I've started to save diligently for a home that will be entirely mine, a sanctuary untainted by familial disputes or obligations. The process of distancing myself from my family was fraught with difficulty and emotional turmoil, but it was a necessary step to protect my well-being and autonomy. The realization that sometimes those closest to you can exploit your kindness was a hard lesson to learn. It has been a significant and painful chapter of my life, but it has also been one of growth and self-realization. I have no regrets about the decisions I've made. My stance is clear: I deserve respect and fair treatment, whether from family or strangers. The breakdown of my family's previously manipulative dynamics, while sad, is a testament to the natural consequences of their actions over the years. Today, as I hear about their adjustments and the shifts in their lives, there's a part of me that feels saddened by the disintegration of what was once my family. Yet there's also a sense of relief and vindication. They are finally facing the reality of their choices, and I am free from the chain of guilt and obligation that once bound me. This newfound freedom has been liberating, allowing me to focus on building a future that honors my values and respects my contributions, not just financially, but in all aspects of life.